Hello and welcome to example 2 on how to throw a custom exception. So if you go to example 2 folder, throw a custom exception. The logical flow is to understand how to throw and catch a custom exception, which is your user defined one. Part of it will create throw exception.php. So let's create that file. Okay. So I have this code from the previous example of how to raise and catch exception. Here we have defined our own text to catch the exception, but however we have used the exception class to catch that exception and use the catch block to catch that exception. But what we want to do is we want to define our own method, and then whenever there's an exception happens in our program, we want that method to get executed. Okay, so let's look at that example. So let's say I'm writing a function called custom exception handler, and I'm saying okay, I will capture an exception here. Okay, and if I find that, I will try to do the same thing here. Okay, instead of catch, I want to catch it in a method. Okay, and it's exception. Okay, and I want to set the exception handler. I want to say PHP, when there is an error, use this method. Okay, send an error to this method. So I'm setting that to say exception handler, and here you have to pass in your function name. Okay, that's in the double quotes. Okay, you have to pass in your function name or a method name inside the double quotes. And now you can raise an error. So once you raise an error, PHP automatically know that it should not take the control. It should give it back that control to this method. Okay, so let's throw an exception, throw new exception, and we'll say exception is raised. Okay, so let's run this, and if you see it here, there is no try, catch and all those things that we have seen it here. Okay, there's no try, catch and those kind of syntax here. What we are doing is we are changing the exception handler. You have seen in this case wherein when you just run this, PHP take the control. We are taking the control back from PHP and saying set this as your exception handler, and if you see an error anywhere, please send it to this method. Okay, so let's run this. Okay, and you can see we are able to catch the exception, and the exception is raised from this method. Okay, that's the caught exception and the message of that exception. Okay, let's do another example. Let's write a method, and then we will see whether we are able to capture that exception or not. So you can still use this method, and you can set the handler now. Okay, and then we will try to use the same method divide here. Okay, so we have the same method divide here. Now we will call this method. We'll say divide 1, 0. Okay, and now we are not writing this in a try catch block, right? We are not doing that. We are directly calling it, and we already said to handle that exception via this method. Okay, previously we never did that. So when you call this, PHP was taking control and raising an error, but here you are saying okay, I want to set the exception handler as my method. Okay, so let's run this. Okay, so the exception is caught. Okay, and then the error is also divide by 0 exception might happen, and then you are able to capture that exception. Okay, so there's another way of capturing a custom exception. You can define your own method and change the handler and get control of that exception, or you can resolve it then and there by using a try catch block. Okay, so here are the two ways. One way is to use try catch, one way is to set the exception handler. Okay, so that's all about how to throw an exception and catch a custom exception via in function, and I'll see you in the next one.